Hello, here is part one of medicinal mushrooms. Overview of historical, modern knowledge, little bit of everything. There's a bit of nutrition in here too, and we're going to focus on, I think there's five or six different mushrooms. This is breaking up a talk I gave at the Chicago Botanic Gardens for the Illinois Association, excuse me, the Illinois Mycological Association, of which I'm a part. So jumping right in, this slide contains just a little bit of info about historical use or references, or at least alluding to use of fungi. Um, Mushrooms have a specific structure that we tend to think of. I always like to do the toadstool, which is not correct because there are many forms of fungi. Of course, we can think of medicinal mushrooms in Asia. There are wall paintings in Africa. There are rock structures and other images in India, which is something interesting I'll talk about in one or two slides. Use in Europe is documented. Middle Ages documentation is limited because all documentation is limited. Native American documentation is limited. Most of what I've found, which is not extensive, is use of food. And I was looking at the Native American ethnobotanical database, which is out of one of the Michigan universities and is a database you can access online. Now that is about a lot of people's research and theses going back to the late 1800s. And there are times when people don't really talk about these things. Now, the creation myths of some, very, very select some, not specifics that I have off the top of my head, do have mushrooms in them, which I think is really interesting. Now, a really interesting component about historical use is Otz the Iceman, who was European, I believe 6,500,000, 65 I'm gonna have to start that over. 65,000 years ago. There we go. So he was somewhere around the Swiss Alps and he was murdered, and then there was an avalanche or a big ice storm, and his body and clothing and his medicine bag or fire starting kit was preserved. Now this little bag kit contain the birch polypore, which grows on birch trees and a few more, even around here, especially north of us in Wisconsin. The photograph on the right is from the Indiana Dunes lakeshore. The photograph on the left is actually this little medicine kit or fire starting kit. When fresh, these polypores mushrooms are a tad bit like styrofoam, like you could squish it and it would pop. They do have medicinal benefit, anti-parasitic. Well, Otz had parasites. He lived a long time ago. He did have diseases. He might have used it for medicine. He might not have. Chinese medicine is what's got the most research and the most documented tradition. The most commonly used fungi is not reishi, is not shiitake. It's actually Wolfiporia or Poriococcus, some little fungi called fuling. There is a version of it called fu shen. Really cool in many, many formulas. In Ayurveda, the medicine of India, there are some references that say, oh, mushrooms are great for vitality. However, there are some groups, and I have familiarity with some of these groups when I study yoga at an ashram in India and followed this specific yogic tradition. Mushrooms disturbed consciousness and could disturb meditation and clarity of thought. So that was called tamastic. Garlic, onion, eggplants always come to mind, which always surprise me. Now you could have cayenne pepper, which is used a lot as flavoring instead of the garlic and onion. Something about firing up the passion, so you're not really allowing your mind to relax. Now this ties into that there is a fungi that might be aphrodisiac. So that might be the reason why they have this association with not consuming mushrooms. Some groups, I have to say. Entheogens, which are mind-altering substances. The classic one is LSD. The other classic one is magic mushrooms. So psilocybin is now documented to be microdosed to treat depression, anxiety. There is a reference for smoking cessation. It is Scheduled 1, which is a national schedule. However, there's so much of this going on that there are people working to try to get that rescheduled. But this is something where counseling should be involved, or at least there should be some talk through. There should be talk through. Michael Pollan has included this in one of his most recent books. Plus, there's great articles on PubMed for you to look at. Now, as we transition, the next segment of this is going to be mostly on nutrition, just a small segment. Remember our evidence of medicine. Most mushroom is still preclinical, that kind of going around the bend, elbow, arrow. You know, we have clinical studies including mushrooms. Some of them are randomized. Most of them are not. There's many, many, many preclinical studies just like herbal medicine. So we'll conclude this little segment and pick up in part 2.